to law school, what you learn is Socrates and Plato. That's what you learn. And these guys can argue either side of an issue. And usually Socrates has a fall guy, and that's the name of the dialogue. The person who he's asking questions to and ultimately demolishes. So am I right? That's about the way the dialogue's going? Yeah? So they're not so frightening, are they? Once you've looked at them, actually they're quite interesting, aren't they? Get boring, but you know, you've read 4 or 5, you've basically read them all, but still, I mean, they're not something you can't handle, are they? Most people go, oh, I can't read Socrates, right? But no, you can, yeah. Why am I saying this? Because this book is presented in the form of a Socratic dialogue, yeah.
Why are you not including Aristotle?
Because he didn't write dialogue. And we're talking about, I'm trying to relate it to the Bhagavad Gita. I'm not giving a lecture on Greek philosophy, though it may seem I am. I'm talking about the Bhagavad Gita and its influence. So, you see, those things are written in the form of a dialogue, and so is this. So is this. And it looks to me like it's influenced by those. I may be wrong. It could be independent, but I think it definitely is some influence going on there. And so this thing emerges in the middle of an epic poem. And who are the chief characters in it? I didn't finish my Socrates and Plato. Let me just finish that first before we get into here. So Plato comes along after Socrates' death, very angry about that, and he really gets back at Athenian society by writing all these dialogues. He's really angry that his master has been put to death, and he really eulogizes him, almost presents him as not a god, but Superman. You know, he's not a superhuman man, but he's a Superman in that he's so intellectually above everybody else, and he demolishes all other people that you're totally awed by. He even presents his death in a dialogue called the Phaedo, where he talks about the soul and immortality. And you get into that dialogue called the Phaedo, because he's talking to a guy called Phaedo before he's about to drink the hemlock. That's the pretense. And he's talking to Phaedo, and they talk about the soul. And Socrates gives his final lecture, like Jesus in the scripture, on what's going to happen to the soul after death. He speaks about how philosophers practice dying. We get our whole idea of the mortification of the flesh and the releasing of the soul in Western thought from these dialogues. The whole idea that the body is evil that goes into Christianity wasn't in Judaism, by the way. Not to the extent that it is in Christianity. Because these have already come in from the Hellenistic world of Greek philosophical thought. That the body is evil, that you have all these sins, that you must mortify your desires, control your desires in order to do what? Release the soul. That's all from Plato and Socrates. Plato is not really, and Socrates, they're not really philosophical people at all. They're religious philosophers. And Socrates is like a guru. In any case, he lectures on that. And so he says, what he means that you mortify the flesh and your appetites, as Socrates and Plato call them, your desires, all the things that make you an unruly person, your diet, everything else. As Christian sainthood developed, that went right into Christian sainthood. The Christian saint mortifies his flesh, stops eating, fasts, does things like that, becomes emaciated and skinny, stops having sex, because all these things are appetites. And if you mortify that, you're going a long way to doing what? Releasing the soul. That's where all these ideas originated in the West, but they're also in this book too. The two books are kind of parallel, and I don't think either of them are true. I think they're good disciplines, and they help you diet maybe, and live a more regular life, and get some order out of chaos, and maybe make you a healthier person because you just don't give way to all your, eating Twinkies all day long, or potato chips or something. And you kind of learn how to curb yourself to some extent. As Plato constantly said, the way the soul should be arranged is you should have temperance. Everything should be in moderation. So, you know, they do help in that regard. But in this lecture, Socrates is finally pictured as giving in Plato. He starts talking about the transmigration of the soul. That there is transmigration of souls. Well, that's exactly what you have in this book here. So there's a strong correspondence between the civilization we're getting in Greece and the West and what's appearing in books like this, at least in places like India. You often call it Indo-European civilization. So unless you think it's totally unrelated, I think you could probably, it's not unrelated. How the ideas go back and forth? Something I think of the way I said, not only Alexander, but a lot of the things that Alexander releases, probably already going on to some extent beneath the surface, but he just moves them forward in a, you know, in a more energetic fashion. When did Alexander live? 300 BC. About a century after Socrates and Plato, and you were talking about Aristotle. Aristotle is a student of Plato. They didn't really get along very, very well. And when Aristotle was forced to flee Athens, he said, you know, Athens has killed one philosopher, they're not going to kill two. And he took off and went to Alexander's father's court and became Alexander's